Stuart here. Today a short video on our MsTest Helper library and some other handy MsTest Helper hints. So you can find the raw source code in our open source, and you can find it as a ready-to-use NuGet package on NuGet. Here we are in Visual Studio, and I wanted to show you a couple of cool tricks right off the bat. MSTest has this idea of a test context that you can use to discover properties about the testing environment, and it has output in the form of write and write line and lots of other cool things. But it turns out that it's not that obvious how to set up your test context easily. The way to do it is to declare it as a static variable uninitialized and then write a little setup test. You can call this anything you want because the class initializer attribute is going to make sure that this is run and that the context of the greater runtime is injected, and that's what gets injected into test context. If you have other DI things that you're using in your test, they can be injected here as well. So the upshot of this is we end up with a fully reified text context that we can use to discover properties about tests, like where test data files are relative to where the test is running, that are going to be machine and folder independent. But we can also use it to now inject into other classes. So one of the things that's available in the helper is this MsTest logger. So this implements iLogger of T. And in this case, I am implementing iLogger where T is the name of my test class. And I'm passing in text context. And the upshot of this is I now have an iLogger object that I can pass to anything that I want, and I can use it in my testing. I should mention that as a companion to class initialize, we have a test cleanup attribute. And you can see that unlike the initialize method, this is not static. So if you are building instance variables of your class that have, for example, connection properties or something else, you can do your teardown there. I always populate both of these from my personal test template. So when I create a new test project, it'll have these things in it. And that way I will remember that I have a way of creating things on startup and injecting the test context. And I have a way of cleaning up on exit. So that being the case, the first test in our test helper is going to test that our test context iLogger helper actually implements the iLogger interface correctly. And in this case, we are going to doing some testing, and we are going to make sure that we can write log critical in this case. But if you can write log critical, you can pretty much write all of the log whatever methods. But we're testing critical because that just ensures that the wire up for iLogger is done correctly. So I can test to make sure that a log level is enabled. I can set properties on my logger that I may want to set, like additional metadata, and I can successfully log to it. Where does the output of this go? Well, it's going to go to test context because the iLogger is redirecting the logging stream by creating a listener that outputs to the test context we created. The next thing that's handy in the library is the ability to have timers around different things in the test. And in this example, we point out that the TX timer method takes a test context and an optional title, which is a good thing to provide if humanly possible. And it will then output to text context.writeLine. It will output the elapsed time and other things. So whatever you would like to get from the timer, and here we demonstrate that you can get either milliseconds or ticks. Generally speaking, on older Windows machines on 32-bit runtimes, ticks are more precise. On modern x64 based architectures, elapsed milliseconds have gone from approximately 3 places to being reasonably accurate. And so for general comparison's sake, probably better to use milliseconds, as ticks will vary by processor architecture and sometimes by operating system runtime version. But we make both available for whatever your particular use case is. And we point out that ID error 0063 should be disabled anytime that you are doing a using and you don't want an explicit using. That is, we get to the bottom of our method and iDisposable interface disposes. When we're using a timer, part of the action of the timer is to precisely measure when the thing within the scope of the using ended. The last method that's super helpful in the library allows you to test that an object, typically a DTO or data transfer object, is serializable as JSON. And actually you see two little helper methods here. One which adds as JSON to text context, which does a serialization to JSON and then writes it to text context with or without a title. That's kind of nice. We have a model called test model, and the true causes all the properties of test model to be filled with sample random data. The real point to this example is on line 103, where in a single line we can say that we want to assert that this model is JSON serializable, and we pass it the type of the model as the generic argument and the instance as the argument. And this will allow a very easy, very quick test that your DTO is genuinely going to be serializable over the wire. Thank you for your kind attention, and if you like this content, please give us a thumbs up and consider subscribing. Thanks.